All right, welcome everyone. This is the virtual student chapter webinar on student leadership micro boot camp, hosted by our speaker, Colonel Lucas Rice. He is Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at a firm called LDX Solutions, and he's also a colonel in the Georgia National Guard. He was gracious enough to present or offer to do a presentation to our student members on leadership based on a course that he teaches. And the great thing about having access to folks like him is that we get both perspectives of a professional that's been in a military setting and has gone through all the leadership development that the military provides, but then also has converted over to the private sector and can give us a good sense of the utility of some of those skills in that landscape. What we've asked him to do here is just give us some of the lessons he's learned and some of the tips that he's gathered through his career and how that translates into an academic audience and for student members in particular. Part of the goal with this webinar is to also create a library of offerings that then we can market to student members as they enroll. So for any student members that are on, thank you for joining us. But we also hope to have this content be disseminated in the future to our student member category. So just a little housekeeping before we begin. We will be taking questions at the end, but if any questions come up during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat box to submit them, and then I'll relay them to the speaker. If you could just mute your phones for now so we can cut down on the background noise, and then we'll ask everybody to open their phone lines back up at the end when we take the open question and answer period. So with that, I will turn it over to Colonel Rice to get us started. So thank you for joining us today, sir.
No, thank you, Eddie. I truly appreciate it, and certainly appreciate the efforts that SAME does both in and out of the military for the engineering world at both the student and operations level. Military and civilian. So great opportunity. Also like to thank all the folks that are on the phone. Anytime you get an opportunity to do continuing education and learn, absolutely take advantage of it. And I know as engineers and engineering students, that's something that rings true for us and continue to learn. I will warn you that if I suddenly start flailing my arms or if I get quiet for a moment, I am actually currently mobilized in defense of the COVID exercise that is going on right now. I am actually in an engineering capacity. I am actually a program manager for a convention center build out for a 200-bed hospital. And so I've holed away as best I can. And so if folks walk by and are a little loud, I apologize, but I've separated myself certainly more than 6 feet as best I can. So I hope everybody out there is staying healthy. This is a real fight with an invisible enemy, and we're doing what we can down here in Atlanta, Georgia. I'll start off with some quick introductions to tell you who I am, a little bit about my background. But my goal today is really to give you a good feel for what leadership means for an individual that is coming out or has been in the military for many, many years, but has been able to also have a career on the outside. And so we'll walk a little bit through my background, and hopefully I can relay to you some of these leadership principles, not only in general, but also applicable to engineering and where they fit and where they've really helped me translate from military to civilian and specifically in the engineering world. I tell people that I have made a career of translating engineering to business and engineering to leadership. And so it's a great skill to be able to bundle those together, and it's served me well so far. So let's go through some ideas that I have here. So what is or why battlefield to boardroom? I am a unique experience in that I've been able to hold down 2 full careers. I am a United States Military Academy West Point graduate in 1993. I served 10 years active duty. My degree is in aerospace engineering. And so day one, I was able to put my degree to work as an aviation helicopter pilot. And so very quickly I was able to use the skills that I learned in an academic environment on the engineering front. I have a master's in business from Emory University here in Atlanta, Georgia. as well as a graduate of the United States Army War College up in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, which is really a master's in strategic studies. So I've been able to continue that education we talked about in my introduction, that furthering that education, professional education throughout both careers. You can see in the middle there on the left, I was an AH-64 helicopter pilot. Have been able and fortunate enough to be able to continue to fly throughout my career, where I currently am a colonel here in the Georgia Army National Guard, following 10 years of active duty. Before 9/11 happened, I wanted to pursue civilian opportunities and really put my engineering degree a little bit more to use. And so I transitioned out and was hired by General Electric here in Atlanta under their Junior Officer Leadership Program, and spent 3 or 4 years there with GE. Missed the military, and so I got back in 2005. After September 11th happened, the need was there, and so I've been in the military since, going on about 23, 24 years now, and I've enjoyed it. Along the way, again, maintaining a civilian career as a traditional guardsman. I have worked in multiple engineering firms for a while, some outside of engineering as well, but Zethanol was an ethanol company where I was a chief operating officer. Middo is a company out of Cleveland, Ohio, a design, build, engineer company. And then currently am with LDX Solutions. And we'll talk a little bit about what LDX Solutions does. I've, I guess in the good or bad way, I've checked all the right blocks. I've got deployments under my belt. I've jumped out of perfectly good airplanes, and I've rappelled out of perfectly good helicopters, which is certainly more easier to do when you're a lot younger. So that gives you a little bit of my background. Talk a little bit about who LDX Solutions is. And the reason I want to bring this to the forefront is, in my capacity in the military side, I am not in an engineering role. I am an aviation officer, as I mentioned. I certainly apply aerospace engineering to the aviation world in flying, but I am not a hardcore PE on the military side. And so I want to talk a little bit more about who LDX Solutions is and where that engineering ties into that leadership, where I serve as the chief operating officer. So who is LDX Solutions? We are an air pollution control systems company that does design build systems for anything that's bad for the environment. Really simplified there. You can see all the things that we do, but in essence, if a system pollutes the air, we've all heard about NOx and SOx and mercury. Our company designs, engineers, fabricates, delivers, and installs that equipment. We do that globally. So I've got projects and project managers all over the world that are implementing our project scope. And so the application of engineering becomes very much to the forefront. Getting into some drawings, and hopefully this excites some of the engineers on the phone. Here's an example of a baghouse that we use. To give you a little context, this baghouse is anywhere from 80 to 120 feet tall. You can see on the right side, the platform that would basically be about 8 to 10 feet up with the stairwell there. So this equipment is very, very large. We primarily focus on large industrial mining, cement and concrete, that type of operation. And so our equipment is very, very large. Our company has about 120 people, and about half to two-thirds of those are engineering and designers. So give you an example here of a baghouse system that we have designed and installed in many, many locations all over the world. We also do smaller systems. You can see the worker there in the center of the page. This is an example of an injection system. Usually, a lot of times we'll do activated carbon injection. And so this would be an example from an engineering and design of a system like that. And then hopefully the younger crowds that are still in school, those flat file 2D pictures. Oh, we got somebody that is off of mute. And so here, for the folks that are younger and in school and didn't know what that 2D rendering was of AutoCAD, here's a model, a 3D Inventor model that we use as well. And this is a thermal oxidizer. Again, very large system that can take process gases and, in essence, in this case, destroy them, destroy the volatile compounds. So that gives you an idea of, from a civilian capacity and an engineering capacity, where my background, certainly recent background, comes from. And so translating that or transitioning that into the leadership side, which is really what y'all are calling about, because I know y'all are great engineers and enjoy it as much as I do. Talk a little bit about engineering in reality for folks that are still in school that maybe have never been in an engineering firm or trying to figure out what it looks like next. I'm going to give you my gray hair old version of where I think engineering is and kind of what it looks like and what to expect when you get out there. So first and foremost, you know, engineering in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment. So what does that mean? The classic and great example is what we're going through right now. This COVID thing, a lot of folks obviously around the globe are infected or are affected, and fortunately a lot fewer are infected. But you know, a month ago, 2 months ago, 3 months ago, who could have told us what was going on and what was the magnitude of the problem that we were going to have with this invisible enemy? Nobody. And so the challenge that we have is what and how as engineers can we help solve this problem? And I'll give you the example that I'm living through right now, which is building out this 200-bed hospital here in a convention center in Atlanta. This project is just entered its 12th or 13th day from conception to installation, and we will be ready to receive patients in the next 24 to 36 hours. So in essence, in 12 to 14 days, we have built a 200-bed hospital. Nobody thought we would be able to do it. Nobody thought it could be done. And I will tell you that it was done through engineering. We have contractors that laid out all of the cubes, made them fit into this convention center. We had medical engineers that joined the team that figured out what equipment we needed at what acuity level, so you know how bad the patients were. Medical engineers brought their equipment in, determined where we could put it and what our throughput could be. And then process engineers looked at it from a flow. Okay, how do we get patients in here that are infected? Where do we take them? How do we get them healthy? And then more importantly, how do we get them home and out of the building without infecting the 250 nurses and doctors that we have brought in over the last 3 days? That was done through engineering, and nobody anticipated this yesterday, the day before, a month ago. And so I encourage you as an engineer, a future engineer and a leader, to always think outside the box. And you know, are you going to think what the next emergency is? Well, if you do, let us know. And from the military side, we'll prepare for it. But society today is a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous arena. And I will tell you that term VUCA comes from my military side, and translating it to corporate American, it's very, very applicable. So that's an example of engineering in reality. Go up towards the top here. Centralized planning, decentralized execution. Again, another military carryover that I think is very applicable. So what are we talking about here? More often than not, projects that are in the engineering world will be assigned to project managers, certainly have owners in the business side that are involved. That centralized planning and getting to those GAs and P&IDs and PFDs are going to be the key start point for that centralized planning. When those are defined, it then, at the pace that engineering occurs these days, has to be executed in a decentralized fashion. So what do I mean by that? Of course, we've got AutoCAD and layers. You've got Inventor to help do modeling and clash detection. But really where this is focusing is on the multiple disciplines. We have to be able, as a leader and an engineer, to be comfortable with managing across disciplines and allowing the disciplines to run in parallel. If we wait, what we used to do 10, 15 years ago is you would wait until a discipline got far enough and got almost done that they would then engage the next discipline in line. And engineering is sped way up. That model no longer holds. So as an engineer, you need to be able to communicate. You need to be able to integrate with multiple disciplines on a single project, and then be able to juggle multiple projects at one time. And so it is really sped up. It's a lot faster, tying back into that VUCA comment down below. But centralized planning, you're going to get your direction, you're going to get your initial set of drawings, your general arrangements, and then you got to be able to run in parallel. So next one, design standards. In the military sense, these are called standard operating procedures. Hopefully all of you are familiar with design standards and what those are. I would highly encourage you as a future leader in your companies to make sure these are very well understood. And this ties back to decentralized execution. If folks are having, what we like to call the good idea fairy that stops by and says, hey, I think I could move this stairwell, 50 feet to the right and it would work better. If that's done in a silo, there's going to be clashes. It's going to affect across all the disciplines. So that design standard of knowing, hey, how do we do this when we get to this point? There has to be a start point for that design standard. And then you manage to the exceptions. If you have your design standards wired tight, everybody knows, the Pareto theory from those that are Six Sigma, smart. Pareto theory is the 80-20 rule. And so from a design standards perspective, if you have a good standards set up, and as a leader, you enforce those design standards, you're going to be right 80% of the time. You then only have to manage to the 20% exceptions. And from a speed of execution, from an accuracy of design, and from a cost of execution, that managing only that 20% becomes a much easier target to hit versus trying to manage 100% because you don't have the design standards set right. So I'd encourage everybody on the call and the engineers that are looking at the leadership perspective, that design standard is imperative to be able to communicate it, and then just as importantly, enforce that design standard. Okay, understanding the project intent. Communicating that from the military perspective, it's called the commander's intent. Again, tying back to centralized planning, decentralized execution, understanding the project intent ties not only into your project managers or program managers that are in the same team you're on, but also understanding the intent of the project from a customer's perspective. Don't assume you know exactly how it should be done without tying in the owners. With their input and understanding the project intent, you will be able to get it much more right. It's never going to be perfect, but you're going to get it much more right the first pass, because if there are questions or there are variables within that 20%, if you understand the project intent, you'll be able to get really close to the right solution without having to ask 50 people or going through 6 revisions of a set of drawings. If you understand the project intent, what the customer is trying to do and what their end state success is, you're going to make the right decisions as a leader to know that, okay, it may not be exact, but it's going to meet their intent. And then you can refine it. Again, working on the small exceptions, not the larger standard designs that should be easy to do. Okay. And then the last bullet for this one is lessons learned are critical. And again, from a military context, we call these after-action reviews. This is probably one of the largest carryovers that I would encourage leaders to carry over into engineering. And I would argue, I don't think not only do we do it very well in the engineering world, but most companies don't do this very well. Lessons learned are imperative in design and in engineering, because the habit seems to be grab the last design that was close to this, or, hey, this is how I did it the last time. And those are a snapshot in time that may or may not be the right answer when you put that design into operation. The owners may have said, you know, darn it, I wish we'd put that, you know, pump on the left instead of the right so I could have ease of maintenance. So those lessons learned need to be captured in an after action review. We call them project closeouts. And so the engineering team and the leaders within that engineering community need to push project managers to make sure that they do closeout reports that allow you to capture those lessons learned and then implement them back into your design standards to make sure that you continue to refine that and wicker that right answer down to a very small variable. If you're taking a shot in the dark every time with a new design and a new concept and you're recalculating, you know, pump sizes or flow rates, you're going to be repeating yourself over and over again without knowing if you're really getting it right. And so that after action review or those lessons learned are absolutely critical as leaders in engineering. And so hopefully that gives you a snapshot of kind of my current, what do I see in the engineering world, and how can future leaders in engineering really make a difference for an immediate difference, really, because these are some pretty easy ones that you can tackle very quickly. All right, so let's take that leadership and let's back away a little bit from the engineering piece and broaden our perspective, and let's talk a little bit more about engineering or leadership specifically within the engineering community. And so what I want to do here is, again, I'm stealing this from the military, but it is very applicable. Bend it left or right for you in the environment you're in. But these are the leadership attributes and competencies that we profess through the military. And hitting on a high level, we'll dive into a select few. You can see the attributes and the competencies written across the top and across the bottom. And the three attributes that go at the top of the character, presence, and intellect. And the competencies are leads, develops, and achieves. And so diving into the character, the attribute of character as a leader. The first one you see there is Army values. And I'm going to share these quickly with you, the Army values. I'm not trying to recruit in the military, but I will tell you that these Army values hold true both in and out of the military. We use the acronym leadership, and that really helps us remember and recall the Army values: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. So let's translate those a little bit. Loyalty. By being a professional engineer, you're loyal to your profession, especially those that not only have engineering degrees that carry forward to get their professional engineering license. Professional education, continuing education, policing your own, those are all things that are attributable to a profession. And certainly engineering is a profession. And so loyalty to that, upholding standards, upholding the values that hold true for engineering come out of that loyalty to us as individuals, to the engineering community. Duty and respect. Again, I tie this back, certainly applicable on the military sense, but duty and respect and really selfless service to the project execution and to the project's success. As engineers, you are the pulse of a project. You are the ones that size, lay out, and create the flow that are successful in whatever engineering endeavor it is. And so the duty, respect, and selfless service to that project and being able to do what needs to get done, having the courage down at the bottom, the personal courage to raise your hand if something doesn't feel right, having the honor, integrity to be able to step up and go, hey, I don't think this is going to work, and here's why, is so much easier to solve when it's on paper. And if you've got to change a couple lines or increase the size of a screw conveyor, these are things that can be done so quickly and so easily on paper. So as engineers, it's absolutely imperative that you maintain the values as a professional engineer and I align them with the Army values of being able to uphold that high standard and step up when something doesn't feel right. The cost of those changes, as everybody here knows, go to 10 and 20-fold if it's something that's caught in implementation and in the field. So the values of an engineer are imperative as a leader, that when something doesn't look right, when it doesn't feel right, when the need is there, you step up and do all the right things. So that gives you an understanding of where the Army values are. Tying into a couple other that I'll pick out here. Presence, military professional bearing. Again, engineering is a profession. And doctors, lawyers, although I'm not sure there's a lot of lawyers in your question, but doctors, lawyers, military are all professions. And those are really captured by just a couple things that define that. Continuing education. We never stop learning, right? A lot of people have the professional education and continuing education credits that are required. We never stop learning. But the other piece of that I hit on a couple minutes ago is that self-policing. If you think through all the professions and how you define that, all of them self-regulate. They have a standard, both an external and an internal standard that they have to uphold. And when those standards aren't being met, the bar gets involved for lawyers and potentially removes their license. Medical is involved. You've got, so that's what defines that profession. And so it's imperative that as an engineer, you uphold the standards of any profession. And so I highly encourage that presence as an engineer and representing yourself and the engineering world. Intellect probably doesn't need much discussion here. Engineers tend to be brainiacs and very smart. The point I'll highlight here is that mental agility. Have the flexibility to think differently as a leader in engineering. Don't fall into the get in line lemmings that you did it that way the last time, we're going to do it that way again. The creativity side of engineering is amazing. And I liken it to the 200 beds that we put in here in the last 4 days. That took some mental agility, some mental flexibility, and to be able to pull that off. And so I encourage everybody to be flexible, remain flexible, think outside the box, but then be able to apply that expertise that you see there at the bottom of the intellect. You need to know your business well. You need to be able to stand in front of people confidently and say, that will work. My numbers, my calculations, my design will work. So have the expertise to be able to provide that and stand up in front of people. So changing over to the competencies side, you see leads. Leads others and builds trust. How, as a young engineer, do you walk into a company full of a bunch of old gray-haired people that have been doing this an awful long time and have built up a lot of rapport and respect? How do you walk in there as a young engineer and be a leader? And that's a challenge that you will find. I would encourage you to look at leadership in two different ways. You don't have to be the out front person. You don't have to be the eyes and ears and the face of a firm to be a leader in engineering. You can be a leader in engineering as a simple designer or as an entry-level engineer by leveraging those leadership attributes and being able to have the courage to say, hey, here's what I've done and here's where I can help. That's a leader at all levels. And so don't be afraid to go in there, learn. Now, I will tell you, and I'll give you a story later, don't come in thinking you know everything. We're smart enough to know that's not the case. So be a sponge, learn, but have ideas, be creative, bring value more than just punching numbers in a calculator, drawing lines on a CAD, or building a model. Engineers are smarter than that, have the confidence and courage to be able to take that on, okay? And then I'm going to slide all the way to the right. You can see there is one bullet under achieves for competency. Get results. This can be done in multiple levels, but at the end of the day, engineering ties to business, and business is about getting results. So be a leader and work on taking it from rev D, Rev E, Rev 6, Rev 7, however you annotate it. Take those down to Rev A or Rev B or Rev 3. Reduce the amount of input, reduce the amount of time it takes. Build those standards that are in place to allow people to run very, very efficiently and get results. That's how you lead in engineering, is you get results. Mistakes are going to be made along the way. That's okay. Acknowledge those mistakes, do an after-action review, determine how and why that mistake occurred, and don't let it happen again. I tell my teams all the time, I'm fine with mistakes. Let it happen once, and don't let them happen. Don't let them be million-dollar mistakes. So get results. That's what leaders do. That's what engineers do. Okay. All right. So leadership in engineering. I'm going to follow back up with a couple of the bullets that I hit on here. Drive results for your team and own them. And that's what I just talked a little bit ago about your achievements. Drive results. Don't sit back and wait as a young engineer coming out and learning and being a sponge. Don't wait for somebody to come and get you and say, hey, you may want to learn from this. Have the courage to go, hey, I'm going to go in that meeting also because I want to learn. That's going to help you get to that point where you can start to drive results. And again, then own them. If a mistake's made, own the mistake. It's okay. People expect mistakes to happen. What you don't want to do is have a mistake that you shy away from, nobody claims, and the mistake happens again and again. Your teammates know, the engineering teams know where the mistakes generated because they've made them too. So own the mistakes. It's okay. But most importantly, learn from those mistakes. Okay? All right. Be willing to go the extra mile, especially as a young, soon to graduate, either as an engineering degree or working on your PE. Be willing to go the extra mile. And I want to walk through the model that I've got with my teams. There are times when design is due, we get behind on engineering and we have to catch up. There's been a change request from an owner that we have to implement very, very quickly. You really separate the leaders from the followers in a time of need. And so set yourself up to be that person that's willing to work till 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night and drive those results. For my team, if I call tomorrow and say, guys, we've got to get this done, they're all in and we'll stay late because they know on the backside, is it a day, is it a week, is it a month later? I'm going to make that up to them. When it slows down, we're going to make that time fall back out and give them that latitude to go to the doctor's appointments, to take that Friday afternoon out, because I know that they gave it to me on the front side and I'm going to give it back to them on the back side. And that's vice versa. There are times when we're slow that I'll say, take Friday afternoon off, you're good. And that's how, when the panic hits, they'll jump right up and be able to dive in. And so I encourage you, be that person that stands in the door, going back to that jumping out of a perfectly good airplane. Anytime you do a jump out of an airplane, a mass jump is what we call them. One person gets to stand in either one of those two doors and everybody else follows. So be that person that stands in the door and is willing to go that extra mile. Okay, excuse me. Sorry about that. Okay, I mentioned this a little bit earlier and a little bit in jest. You don't have to have gray hair to be right. I will tell you that my experience in the engineering world, and I don't know if the camera's working or if it's on, but I'm a gray-haired guy now. You do it long enough and you stress out enough over military operations and engineering projects, your hair turns gray. I will tell you that when I started in engineering, really transitioning to the civilian sector, I felt it was an uphill fight to be heard. I felt it was an uphill fight to have a vote, because it seemed like if you didn't have that gray hair and you didn't have 20 years of experience or 30 years of experience, that, well, you just don't know. You haven't been in the fight long enough to really get that credit. And I will tell you that's a bunch of malarkey. There is no reason that young, forward-thinking folks can't be in the spotlight and drive success. And I'll give you an example where, in my experience, this flipped, and this mantra of I'm a gray hair and I know what I'm doing. When we transitioned from 2D flat file to 3D modeling, every one of those folks that had been doing, even onion paper, going back a long way, everybody had been doing flat files was completely floored and had no clue, barely how to turn on a computer, let alone how to do modeling. And now you make them interactive models and you do clash detection. There are a lot of folks that are gray hairs that have no clue what they're doing. Have the confidence to go, I've got this, and let me show you what we can do. They won't figure out how to do it probably. That dog's probably a little old for the real old gray hairs, but they're going to be really impressed that you know what you're doing, and they should put you in the forefront as a leader in that project or in that model. So for the younger folks that are students now, leverage that. Get to know how to model or the modeling programs very, very well. For engineering, on the engineering side, make sure you're most current on what's the right calculation for flow rate, or if you got a deluge system, how much water volume are we talking. Be current on all that information, because the folks that have been doing this a long, long time, a lot of times go off of what they used to know yesterday, and they don't know what's coming tomorrow. So be that leader that knows what's coming tomorrow and can separate and differentiate yourself. Okay. All right, learn to lead with less experience. This goes back to what I was talking about up above. As a young engineer, don't be afraid to lead, even if you have less experience. And let me give you, this is a story I alluded to very early in our conversation here. Following West Point, I went down to Fort Rucker, Alabama, and learned how to fly helicopters. About 14 months all in, including the Apache transition and gunnery. When I came out, and my first active duty assignment was to Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the first of the 101st Aviation, Screaming Eagles. Any good military movie, you'll see the Screaming Eagle patch on the shoulders. When I showed up, I don't know if there's any military buffs on the line, but first of the 101st Aviation was the attack unit that punched the hole in the radar that allowed Desert Storm to kick off. So the first shots fired by Desert Storm were by first of the 101st Apache helicopters. I showed up about 1 year after they got back, all combat veterans, flown some very interesting, very challenging missions, knew way more than I ever, would potentially learn in a career, not knowing the wars that we would have, after that. I showed up day one as a 23-year-old lieutenant, and my co-pilot at the time was what's called a Chief Warrant Officer 4, who had been in the military 28 years, almost 30 years, and had 4,000 flight time hours. I was his boss. So you can imagine, how the hell do you manage somebody that is so much experienced, so much older, so much wiser. At the end of the day, we made a great team because I brought new ideas. I challenged his thinking in the most respectful way, and doing it one-on-one, not in front of other people. But I tug on his sleeve and say, hey, here's something I'm thinking. What do you think? And you could see him kind of walk through that and go, man, that's not what we had thought about before. And that's not the way we're going to plan this mission this time, but that makes sense. And it would give me the opportunity to then turn around and lead and provide that input and that feedback to these folks that had way more experience than I ever did. So as an engineer, you're going to face that same thing. You're going to be going into shops, into projects that the other engineers are going to have a lot of experience. Don't dismiss your ideas. Tug on the sleeve, take them to the side and go, hey, here's what I'm thinking. And if they don't agree with you, ask them why and challenge that thinking. Again, back to the Six Sigma side, we play the whys game, the 7 whys. Well, why is that? Well, why is that? Learn that mentality. Start to think like that and really get down to the root of what it is as engineers that we do to create solutions for our customers. Okay. I think this might be my last bullet, but discover the importance of mentorship. If you have never had, or you don't currently have at least one, I encourage 2 or 3 mentors. You're missing out. As a leader in engineering and as a young budding leader growing up in the engineering world, you need somebody to pick their brain in a safe way that there's no retribution. You don't look dumb. No questions are stupid. You just don't get it. Having a mentor that you can close the door with, or go to the lunch with, and really safely pick their brain is invaluable. And I would encourage engineers that maybe you're coming out of school and you've been doing this a little while and you have a little more seasoning to you. Also be a mentor. When you get to that point in your career, mentor 1 or 2 or 3 people, because as a leader, that will put you in a position that you are being held accountable to your subordinates in a leadership manner. So when you give guidance and direction to your mentees, you need to be able to look in the mirror and go, am I doing that myself? And so as a leader in engineering, find those mentors. Go out and actively seek them. I'd recommend doing them in multiple disciplines, multiple businesses. Find the engineering guru, find the business guru, find the life coach guru. Whatever it is, have that very short list of folks that you can turn to and pick their brains, because what will happen is when you get into tough times, you're going to need those relationships. So find a mentor, develop that relationship, and challenge that mentor to engage with you at a minimum quarterly, if not monthly. And it can be just a quick phone call, just a quick sanity check, but it's important to keep that mentor-mentee relationship. Okay? All right. So kind of a closing question. Hopefully my timing looks like it's about right. I challenge my folks, and you could replace engineering with whatever discipline you want. You can make this, are you a structural engineer? Are you a civil engineer? Are you a process engineer? I generically ask the question, are you an engineer? And I'd imagine most of the folks on the phone would say yes, either disciplined academically or as a professional engineer, but we're all engineers. What I challenge you with coming out of this discussion is, are you a leader in engineering? They're different. They're very, very different. And where I started, I've made a career out of being a leader in engineering. There are a lot of great engineers, way better than I could ever be. And I know enough to be dangerous in the engineering community after all these years now. I know enough to be dangerous in engineering. But I will tell you that as a leader, I have no problem standing in front of folks. When problems come up, I'm that person that stands between my engineering team and the owner, as an example, and I shield the problems. I keep the engineering staff safe, secure, and working and enjoying what they do. The flip of that as a leader in engineering is when things go very, very well, I get out of the way. I'm nowhere to be seen. I highlight the engineers. I highlight the folks that did that hard work. That's what leaders do. In the military and in the Army specifically, we don't eat before our enlisted soldiers and our junior officers. We eat last as leaders. In engineering, you need to be able to be that leader that shows you care about your engineers and you're willing to step up for them both in good and bad times. Okay? All right. So with that, Eddie, I think that about times me out. I'll leave it up on the battlefield to Boardroom. That's a book I wrote about a year ago that kind of really talks through and addresses the transition from a leadership perspective and using these leadership skills that we learn in the military to be able to apply them to corporate America. So a lot of the stuff we talked about today is found in that book in my webpage there. So Eddie, I'll turn it back over to you, and I don't know if any questions came through or if anybody wants to open up for questions.
Thank you, sir. Yes, I did unmute everyone's lines so we can flow into the open Q&A presentation. I did want to thank you to start just with your comments. What struck me was the need for how much of our leadership development that needs to be purposeful on our part, whether we're a student or a professional, that there's tools out there at our disposal that we need to seek out, skills that we should be looking at, and that we really need to be purposeful about how we do that as an emerging professional. The other image that came to my mind when you were talking about the skill acquisition and knowing what we're good at and obtaining new skills is seeing ourselves as kind of a toolbox or a Swiss Army knife. And when you get handed a Swiss Army knife or a toolbox, the first thing you do is look into it to see what tools are in there. You open up the Swiss Army to see all the different gadgets that are there. And for us as professionals, I feel like it's the same thing. When we put ourselves out there, we want people to know where we could be applied. You know, what skills do we have that can be applied to different situations? So I appreciate that comment of, you know, be mindful of the skills that we're acquiring and how they might be useful to the people we interact with. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. You bet.
Okay, so yeah, we do have about 13 minutes till the end of the session. So if there's any questions, the lines are open. Feel free to jump in. We did get a comment in the chat box, but David, if you're still on, can you just voice what you were trying to communicate?
Sure, David Packard, and one of the challenges that we see in our student chapters, and I think that this is where I'm you know, seeking guidance, is that students today, you know, in this environment, are not necessarily impressed by, you know, by the gray hair experience that we bring to the table. And so the idea here is to translate the practices that we've all learned through experience into valuable lessons for today's college students, you know, and make it attractive to them and make it valuable to them. So I guess my question is, you know, it kind of comes back around to bridging the gap, the generation gap. And I don't know if you've got any specific experience with that in the military, where you've got these new young recruits, and you're trying to communicate to them concepts that come from history, you know, or from your experience. So, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks, David. I think I understand the question, and it sounds like it's really about how do you attract young folks into the engineering world, and what tools can we use to encourage them into the engineering world. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. And how do you make it palatable for, you know, for a young person whose thoughts are, well, I'm not sure what their thoughts are, but you know, that they have different tools than we have, technical tools, and they learn a lot of technical stuff in the classroom.
Sure.
Now we're telling them to think about the professional world that they're about to enter, and again, it's just like talking to your kids, you know.
Right. Yeah, of course.
How do you make that?
I would tell you that it's a combination of both sides, and this goes back to the professionalism and the definition of a profession. I would encourage folks that are in the profession to not only uphold the standards, not just design standards, I mean professional standards of engineering, but encourage folks and show them what that means to be a professional. And then from the skill set perspective, I'll give you an excellent example from the military side that correlates. I'm an aviator. I fly helicopters. I will tell you that about 10 years ago, my job started to become much less attractive and almost becoming extinct. Not quite yet, fortunately, but this thing called unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, came to being. And we now fly drones all over the place, including in engineering, to get site layouts and to get dimensions. You know, laser technology is used all the time. The young kids that were coming into the military and wanted to be pilots, the old pilots had trouble converting over to drone flying, to sitting in a box halfway around the world using just instruments to fly. Us old people had trouble adapting to that. The flip of that was you would get a 21-year-old kid who'd been playing Xbox or iGames or whatever they all are, had been doing it for years and completely understood and felt the aircraft through the little hand controller. And so for us old folks, these new aviators that were coming in and able to very quickly pick up and fly a plane, a helicopter, whatever it was, floored us. and we're like, how the heck did they do that? So I would encourage young kids that are learning modeling, young students that are learning the ins and outs of modeling. The older generation doesn't know those details, and the engineering world needs to learn to adapt that, to be willing to do that. I can't tell you how many times in a firm you'll hear an older generational engineer, you know, throw away the idea of 3D modeling. It's just too hard. It's slow. I can knock that out in 10 or 15 minutes on a flat file. Well, that's great, but that model allows for so much more in engineering with the clash detection and being able to do walkthrough, Navis fly-throughs. And so we both sides need to be willing to adapt and go, that new technology is neat, and younger guys are going to get it. And the younger guys need to look at that and go, this is a profession that I'm entering, and it needs to police itself and bring those new ideas to a standard that is set very, very high as a profession. So I hope that answered the question.
Thank you so much, Lucas.
Yeah, you bet. Any others? I just was flipping through the chat here. I don't know, is Andra Clapsaddle still on?
Yep, I'm on. Yeah.
Hey,
so,
I saw your question. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, thanks for your presentation. Very informative. And what I was wondering though, for our students that are in the military that are going to go directly into an engineering firm in a technical role.
Sure.
You've given us some great building blocks here today on how they can develop their leadership skills once they're there. But when or how, at what point in their career do they decide, you know, do I move from a technical role into a management role? I mean, is it
Sure.
early on, or should they, you know, is it a matter of experience? Just, you know, from what you've seen, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, and it's a great crossroads for engineers. I absolutely agree with you and understand the question. There are folks that love to sit at a computer or at a workstation with 7 screens and 4 computers and being able to model and flip and spin and turn and calculate. And they're amazing, amazing engineers. And that's what they love to do. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. There are also people that after sitting in a chair for about 30 minutes go, man, I need to get up and do something else. And so those folks are the ones that tend to want to, you know, gravitate more towards the leadership side and can do both. And so to answer the question, I would encourage folks that through that 3, 4, 5-year timeline, become the best engineer, become the best designer that you can, and fall in love with what you do in engineering. And after that 3, 4, 5-year period, you can still be a leader and be a hardcore engineer. You can be an engineering discipline manager where you're still doing engineering, but you're managing people. Then there's the leadership side, which again, I would encourage folks at about the 3, 4, 5, 6-year mark, start to look at project management or a discipline management and get a flavor for leadership. And if you like that side of it, retain the engineering skills. They're invaluable. You have to be able as a leader in engineering to look at drawings and be able to know what they tell you. It doesn't mean you're still doing the calculations or you're still doing the drawing specifically, but you need to be able to look at a drawing and go, something doesn't look right. And you know, one of the secrets from the military side that we share is, as a leader in the military, and having done this a long time, I can stand in front of a formation and I can look, and I may not know all the details of the uniform that somebody may be wearing, but I can look at 2 different people and go, one of them is different than the other. Somebody's wrong, right? And so in the engineering world, as a leader, you need to be able to look at a drawing and go, something doesn't look right, something doesn't stand out, and dive into that detail when needed. That sounds like not a question there. So any other questions?
Yeah, I do actually have a question. My name is Xander Kitchen. I'm a junior at Crystal Lake South High School, Crystal Lake, Illinois. I'm currently doing a research project. I'm doing a research project on the efficacy of certain leadership styles, particularly the efficacy of military leadership and character-based leadership. throughout your career, has there ever been an example of where character-based leadership has clearly had a greater impact than other leadership styles?
Yeah, I would encourage you to YouTube any of the great leaders in military history. And I'll give you a personal example from years ago for me when I was in fact, I think I was a junior, maybe a senior in college. And this may be beyond your age, and I don't know if you'd remember, but there was a gentleman in General Norman Schwarzkopf. And I'll tell you, there wasn't many military members that had much more charisma and character than that gentleman. And there is a great YouTube video of the speech he gave at West Point in '92, I believe it was. I highly encourage you to watch that video where he talks about character and charisma as a leader. So yes, it absolutely plays a part, but let me clarify. The charisma and character cannot replace the knowledge and know-how. You cannot fake your way through leadership. You may get away with it once, but maybe twice, but people will see through that. And so that's why, back to the question earlier, I encourage people to spend time in engineering, do the grunt work, do the hard calculations, do the long hours, so that you do know what you're talking about at the backside of your career, where leadership does allow you to have that character and charisma. There's probably a persona in the engineering world that, personality is not near the top 10 of things that engineers have, right? That's a bunch of junk. There's no reason that engineering can't be fun, can't be charismatic, and can't draw other people into that because you know what you're doing, but you're having fun doing it and you love doing it as a leader. So congratulations on the work you're doing. It sounds like it's an interesting topic.
Oh, and one more question, please.
Sure.
I'm actually currently in the process of applying to West Point, the United States Naval Academy, and the United States Air Force Academy. I really want to be a pilot, and I actually want to fly. But I mean, your comment on how it's changed to more, I don't know, virtual piloting.
Yeah.
What do you think the prospects of me, hopefully a class of 2025 Service Academy graduate, have of actually flying planes or any aircraft? Yeah,
you absolutely can. The biggest hurdle you're going to see is going to be the medical side, to making sure that you qualify, eyesight and the medical side of it. When I talk about us becoming fewer pilots wise, there are fewer manned helicopters now, but I will tell you that either are still going to be available for a long time. Just because I'm a West Point grad, I'd highly discourage you going to Navy or Air Force for obvious reasons. But the reality is, I will tell you that the Army has more pilots than both of those two put together. And so I would take a look at, do you want to be a fixed wing or rotary pilot? If you want to be a fixed wing pilot, there are very few Army slots. There are some that are fixed wing aviation, but if you want to be a rotor head, there are very few Navy slots, but the Army has more pilots because we have so many aircraft in our inventory. So I highly encourage you to pursue it. And certainly if there's anything I can do to help, would love to be able to help you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you bet. Good luck.
Well, thanks to everybody that joined. I think we are right at the top of the hour, so that's all the time we had set for this. But I appreciate everybody's engagement and participation, and be on the lookout for announcements for future virtual student chapter conferences or webinars. So with that, thank you, Colonel Rice, and appreciate you joining us and sharing your knowledge with us. So everybody, I hope you have a great day.
You bet. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate the engagement.
Take care.